Hey guys. So the Lord dropped a huge gift on us this year, and that gift is the ancient, priestly 364-day solar calendar used by Enoch and by the Essenes at Qumran. It's what I have referred to in my past videos as the Enochian calendar. Now, this calendar doesn't work how most people think the Enoch calendar works. All of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or Zadok, or Enoch calendars that you can find online begin this solar calendar year at the equinox. But you can't just use the sun. You have to use the sun in combination with the Mazzaroth to determine the first day of the year. So what I mean by that is the sun must be in the correct house, quote unquote, to start the year. And that means it has to be within the boundaries of the Aries constellation. And our Enochian calendar that we're using does this. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's just the simple explanation. Now, the calendar we're using is the result of research from the Tabernacle of the Bridegroom YouTube channel, who has looked at Enoch's star charts, sun charts, and moon charts. There are many other interesting calendars out there that watchmen are looking at, but the Enochian calendar is the only one that is precisely synchronized with the dates of actual recent celestial events, such as the Child Asteroid Revelation 12 sign and the January 11th eclipse midpoint, using the Book of Haggai as the key. So, to be more specific, there are two key dates within that book. Elul 1, which is mentioned in Haggai 1:1, and Kislev 24, which is mentioned in Haggai 2:10. And when you map these on the Enochian calendar, they correspond to September 19th, 2023, and January 11th, 2024, the dates of the Child Asteroid Revelation 12 sign and the massive eclipse midpoint. As such, they serve as anchor dates, correctly aligning the Enochian and Gregorian calendars. There are also other hints. The January 11th midpoint, which maps to Kislev 24, or 924 on the Enochian calendar, is the midpoint of the most recent and next blood moons, which are exactly 429 days from January 11th. So that's right here. This midpoint is January 11th, and the most recent blood moon prior to that was on November 8th, 2022, and the next one is on 3/13 or 3/14 of 2025. Okay, so that's exactly 429 days on either side. So this 429 is 924 reversed, or in other words, Kislev 24 reversed. So that's a hint that this midpoint date, these 429 is pointing to this midpoint date, calling it out as Kislev 24. And additionally, Haggai's repeated use of the expression 4 and 20, or rather 4 and 20th, which you can see here. It's, I don't know, it's a whole bunch of verses. 4 and 20th, 4 and 20th, is also a hint to the Enochian calendar, because the Enochian calendar in the early 21st century begins each year on 4:20 at sunset. So 4 and 20th is a hint to that. And in addition to synchronizing with the sky, we've seen this big symmetrical diagram here reveal numerous astonishing and meaningful numerical patterns when the Enochian calendar is placed alongside the Gregorian calendar, demonstrating that they're correctly aligned with one another. Now, usually on my channel, on most of my videos, in the description box you can find a link where you can download this diagram that shows this amazing alignment. And it also has a key or a legend that gives the meanings of a lot of these numbers. So I now understand why the Lord has gifted his children with this calendar. It's so that we can use it to determine the correct date of Shavuot, aka the Feast of Weeks, which is the likely time of the rapture. The Sivan 6 date that we were looking at in the last two videos was Enoch's birthday and the day of his rapture, but it was not Shavuot. Okay, so this really shouldn't say Shavuot here. So after the Pharisees killed Jesus Christ, the positions that they held prevailed, such as their method of counting the Omer, which is the count of 50 days until Shavuot. Their position, that it begins on the 16th of Nisan and ends on the 6th of Sivan, became the Jewish tradition, and it remains in place even until today. But Jesus was not a Pharisee. He wanted to be baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, who was an Essene. Now, the Essenes followed the Book of Jubilees, which followed the solar priestly sabbatical calendar. And using this calendar, Shavuot always fell on the 15th of Sivan, or the 15th of the third month. Okay? Now, this is confirmed in Jubilees chapter 44. And mainly in the first 4 or 5 verses. And amazingly, Shavuot is actually mentioned in verse 4. So that's 44 verse 4. So that's 444, which is a huge hint to that it's connected with the door, because the 4 is the number 4 biblically represents the door. And you can also go to thetorah.com and look at their Shavuot article, and they explain how to get that 15th of Sivan date from Jubilees 44. Now, I just want to say quickly thank you to brothers Jordan and Andreas for showing me that part of Jubilees that specifies when Shavuot is supposed to be observed according to these priestly solar calendars. Okay, so the way they counted the Omer back then was they counted 50 days from the morrow after the first Sabbath, after the week of unleavened bread. And that regulation on how to count the Omer is found in Leviticus 23. So let's take a look at the Enochian calendar and see how we can count the Omer on this Enochian calendar. So the first thing, okay, so this is month 1 in 2024 of the Enochian calendar. So this is Nisan. And it begins on April 21st, or more specifically April 20th to the 21st, sunset to sunset, but I'm just going to say April 21st for simplicity's sake. And one thing you have to know about these Enochian solar priestly calendars is that they always start the year on a Wednesday. So April 21st is declared to be Wednesday. Now, on the Gregorian calendar, April 21st is something else. I think it's Sunday. But just forget about what it is on the Gregorian calendar. They declare the first of the year to be Wednesday, and that's how it works. And that's how the Omer count, like their Omer counting method works. Like you have to have that in order for their Omer counting method to work, because that makes the 26th always a Sunday, and it makes Shavuot always a Sunday. Okay, so now that we are starting our Enochian calendar on a Wednesday in the same way that they do it, we can use their Omer counting method. And by the way, the reason they started on a Wednesday is because the luminaries were created on the 4th day of creation week. So that's when, like, the sun was created and got set into motion. So that would be when time, when the days began, so to speak, right? So, okay, so now that we can use their Omer counting method, we can just do it exactly the same way that it's done, that the Essenes did it at Qumran, or how it's done in the Book of Jubilees. And the way it's done is that, like I said, it's the first. You take the first Sabbath after the week of unleavened bread, which is right here on the 25th. Okay, so the 14th is a Passover, then you have 7 days of unleavened bread, and then you've got these 3 days of nothing, and then you've got Saturday, or the Sabbath, right, which is the 25th. And it says in Leviticus 23, you wave the wave sheaf offering on that Sunday, like the morrow after the Sabbath. Okay, so that's the 26th. And that's also the first day of the Omer count. So it's a 50-day Omer count. So starting on the 26th, you count 50 days, okay? So you go, this is the first like 7 right here. That ends up here. And then this is the second 7. And this is the third 7. This is the fourth 7. This is the fifth 7. And then we go to Sivan. This is the sixth 7. This is the 7th complete 7. Seventh complete Sabbaths, right? Ending on that Saturday, the 14th. And then the morrow after that is the 50th day, which is Shavuot, or Feast of Weeks, okay? So that is Sivan 15, and on this calendar corresponds to July 4th. July 3rd to July 4th, sunset to sunset. So there you have it. I think, like I said, the reason God gifted us with this calendar a few months ago is for the purpose of enabling us to discover the correct date of Shavuot. So now that we've established that, let's take a look at the sky on July 4th. So here's a picture of it. Let me first go into Stellarium. So here's July 4th, and I'm zoomed out a little bit more. This is the ecliptic here, along which the sun, moon, and planets go from right to left. And then this right here is the Milky Way, this band of, and I also added the galactic equator to make it to where you can identify it a little bit easier. And so you can see on this date of July 4th that Jupiter is almost in the horns of Taurus. And then you've got the sun right here, almost dead center in the constellation of Gemini, or the twins. And to the left of that is the planet Venus. And all of this is right here to the left of the Milky Way. Okay? And as I showed in a community post, this is all producing a nice wedding ring here. So if you look at the entire Milky Way from a top-down view with the position of the Sun and Venus, you can see a nice wedding ring that is formed there. But what I want to show is, I wanted to show this in this view of the sky. And as I explained in my last video, both the Acts 27 and 28 ship voyage story and John 20 chapter 24, so John 20:24, are both hinting to the sun being in Gemini. So if you look at Acts, let's see here, Acts 27 and 28. So if you look at 27:37, it talks about the ship being having 276 souls, and I talked about this in the last video. But basically, that's referring to the sun being in Sagittarius at 276 degrees of longitude on the ecliptic. So that's when the sun was all the way back here on the other side, also in the Milky Way. So it was right here over the ship of Sagittarius. This is the ship, this is the anchor. And so that was like the first celestial clue in Acts 27:28 story. And then if you go to the next chapter, it says that in Acts 28:11, it mentions the sign of Castor, a ship who had a sign of Castor and Pollux. And Castor and Pollux are the stars in the constellation Gemini. So that's the hint to the constellation Gemini. So that was showing you the journey of the sun from this point here on the Milky Way to the other side, on the other side of the Milky Way, right? So because when it entered in to Castor and Pollux in verse 28:11, it was right there. So it's telling you from Milky Way to Milky Way, basically. And then if you look at the verse right after that, or 2 verses after that, it mentions regium, how they fetched a compass and came to regium. Okay, now regium means rupture or fracture, and so that's a reference to the Milky Way. Okay, because the Milky Way, if you look at pictures of it, for instance, it's often been noted that it looks to be like a fracture or a rupture in space. Okay, so that's how the Acts 27:28 ship voyage story is pointing to it. And also, as Steve Fletcher noted, it says, after 3 months we departed in a ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the Isle. So if you look at the end of astronomical winter, that is March 20th, okay? And because it says winter, right? And then it says after 3 months. So if you take 3 months after winter, it comes to June 20th, and that was the date that the sun had first entered into the Castor and Pollux constellation. So on June 20th, it first touches this boundary here, entering into that Castor and Pollux or Gemini constellation. So three months after winter, after the end of astronomical winter, March 20th, it enters Gemini, Castor and Pollux. So yeah, that is an astonishing bit of astronomical information given there. And so yeah, all of the astronomical clues in Acts 27 and 28 seem to be pointing to the arrival of the sun in the constellation Gemini. And it even gives you a hint about the Milky Way when it mentions this town of Regium. As we mentioned, Regium, that name actually means fracture or rupture. So that's another reference to the Milky Way. And Gemini is right there to the left of the Milky Way. And keep in mind as well, after this astronomical information, then it mentions in the story that the south wind blew and took Paul's ship through that narrow strait of Messina between Sicily and Italy. So if you look at this on a map, if you look at the path on a map, and that town named Messina was originally called Zankli, which is a Greek word that means scythe, and it was called that because the town of Messina has this natural harbor that resembles a scythe. And here you can see it's all built up with the port and the harbor and everything, but originally it was just this scythe shape, so that's why they called it that. And even the artwork for Pollux, which is the twin on the left here, has that exact shape there, because he's got a scythe in his hand. So this, what's being telegraphed here is this astronomical information about the sun arriving in Gemini, followed by hints about a harvest. So it's telling you that right after that happens in the sky, then the harvest comes. And then in John chapter 20, it also hints at the sun being in Gemini. So these last 8 verses of chapter 20 are suspiciously matching the year profile of, because it starts on 2024 and it ends at 2031, so that very suspiciously matches the year profile of the time of the end of 2024 going to 2031. And if you look at what it says for John 20:24, it says, "But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came." And Thomas means twin, and Didymus also means twin. So you've got 2 twins here. In other words, reference to Gemini constellation. And it also says one of the 12. So it could be one of the 12 constellations on the Hebrew Mazzaroth. So for instance, this is the Hebrew Mazzaroth. So you've got 12 constellations. So there's Gemini. So one of the 12. Okay. And then it says when Jesus came. So when Jesus came in 2024, when the sun was in Gemini. So that's another nice hint that is a second witness to what Acts 27 to 28 seems to be telling us. Next, let's look at some predictive programming that seems to be confirming this date or around this date. So first we have this piece of artwork from the music group called Gorillaz, Gorillaz. And this was brought to my attention by brother Andreas over at the Raw Repent YouTube channel. And so this appears to be a mockery of Christians who are searching for the rapture, for the date of the rapture. And so they mock it with this word rupture. And you can see you've got kind of like Jubilee type of dates going on here. And one hint here is the fact that down here on the lower right, it says rupture. Now, like I said, the town of Rhegium that's mentioned in Acts 28 means rupture, so that's sort of a reference to that. But I think, and then it also, above that, it says crack in the world, okay? And then below that, okay, so crack in the world, I think, is a reference to, again, to the Milky Way, right? Because, like I had just showed, the Milky Way appears to be like a crack or a rupture in the world, okay, in the universe. And the confirmation for this is that right before it, or excuse me, right below this, it says beginning is end is beginning. That is a reference to the Ouroboros. And the Ouroboros is the snake eating its own tail, and it's always been a symbol of the Milky Way galaxy. Okay, so this is the Milky Way. And that's, if you look at the Milky Way like we did earlier when we were looking at that wedding ring, looking at it top down, it looks like a snake eating its own tail. Now, what's interesting here is that this text here represents the Milky Way, and just to the left of the text, you've got the sun right here on this photograph, and then the heart, which represents Venus. And this precisely matches what's found in the view of the sky that I just showed you on July 4th. Okay, you've got this white band here, which is the Milky Way, the rupture, if you will, and then you've got the sun and then Venus right here in Gemini. Okay, so that was that piece of artwork from the music group Gorillaz. Now, the next thing I want to show you is something you've probably seen before. Actually, real fast, let me just show you something from the film This Is the End from 2013. And this film is also about the end of the world. It even has a rapture scene, and in that rapture scene, just before the rapture, you have these two characters here, the Seth Rogen character and his friend, and you see that the Seth Rogen character picks up a Milky Way bar, and then his friend gets an orange soda. Okay, so the orange represents the sun, and so that's the sun in the Milky Way. And right after they get those items, you have the rapture. So they're showing you that the sun is in the Milky Way just before the rapture. Okay. Now this next one is about the film Back to the Future. And in the film, they have a time machine that travels through time when the vehicle reaches 88 miles an hour. Now, this has a dual meaning. Firstly, July 4th is the 88th day since the April 8th eclipse, the second great American eclipse. You can just go to gematrinator.com and go to their date calculator, or any other date calculator, and you can see that July 4th is the 88th day. And secondly, on July 4th, as we've seen, the sun is in Gemini. So the number 88, if you look at it, it's like twins because it's two eights. So that's another numerical symbol for the constellation Gemini. And also in that film, towards the end of the film, when they actually travel through time, when the clock tower gets hit by lightning, which they use as a power source, and it enables the vehicle to travel through time, it actually travels right here at this point, and you can see it's right in front of Ruth's frock shop. And Ruth is a reference to Shavuot because the story of Ruth happens at the time of Shavuot. So, next thing I want to show is from the film Knowing, which is also about the end of the world. And this is just the day before, like, the big solar flare comes and ends the world. And he mentions, when he's talking to his father on his cell phone, he mentions Pentecost, which is just another word for Shavuot. Now let's take a look at the 2001 film Donnie Darko. Now, the name Donnie Darko, the last name Darko, is a reference to a solar eclipse because a solar eclipse is a dark circle or a dark O, so to speak, right? So Donnie Darko plays the role of that eclipse in the astro symbolism of the scene I'm about to show you. So if you've seen this film, there is a part in the very beginning which sort of sets the timeline for the movie, and where Donnie Darko is sleepwalking, and he sleepwalks to the golf course, and he meets this bunny, this man in a bunny suit, who tells him that the world is going to end in 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, and 12 seconds. And so forget about what they're telling you with hours and minutes. If you just add those numbers together, they add up to 88. And so this bunny is talking to Donnie Darko. Remember, Donnie Darko represents that eclipse, the second great American eclipse on April 8th. So he's telling the eclipse that in 88 days the world will end. So in other words, 88 days from that eclipse. And in case the eclipse symbolism of Darko wasn't obvious enough, immediately after this scene, he falls asleep there on the golf course, and he wakes up, and the character portrayed by Patrick Swayze is right above him, waking him up, and Patrick Swayze's character forms an eclipse with the sun. So I'll show you that real fast.
Son, Donnie Darko? Donnie Darko? What the heck's going on here?
Who is it, Don?
It's Eddie Darko's kid. I'm sorry.
So yeah, there you go. He even says son, like kind of a little hint there to the sun. But you can see how that Patrick Swayze character eclipses the sun. He's got his head in front of the sun just like an eclipse. So that movie is got all kinds of eclipse references, not just those two, but all throughout the movie. Anybody who's looked at it, and the eclipse that it's referring to is that one on April 8th. Okay, and then there's all this other stuff in the film about 88. So there's another scene where Donnie Darko opens a medicine cabinet, and there's this prescription bottle here, and it's got the numbers 7/24/88 on it. So that could be July 2024, 88 days from the eclipse, or alternatively July 2024 Gemini, like Sun in Gemini. And yes, I am aware of the Donald Trump encodings in this film, and I do agree with them. They are also sort of obvious. You know, his name is Donnie, right, or Donald, and he's wearing a T-shirt all the time that says Triumph on it, which is a play on Donald Trump's last name, or his family last name, Trumpf. So yeah, and I'm looking at a different level, because there's a lot of levels of symbolism in this film, and I'm looking at a different level from the Trump stuff. Okay. Now there are a lot of connections in films, in these predictive programming films, between the number 88 and the concept of nuclear war, and also connections between 88 and lightning. So if you go to this channel here, which is LXXXVIII, which is 88 in Roman numerals, Finis Temporis, and look for this title here, 88 lightning bolt nuclear, the end of the world. This is a really, really good video, really well made, that shows a lot of those connections. And finally, I'll just show some of the imagery in the film Independence Day. I think that came out in the late 90s. And one of the things that they always showed was the alien spacecraft entering the atmosphere. And before that you could actually see the alien ship, there would be these huge dark clouds with fire in them. And that matches that, and I always thought it looked very similar to how God is described when he descends on Mount Sinai, minus the mountain, of course. So that's one example right here, and then this is probably a little bit more familiar to most people when it shows up over New York City. So it's just interesting that they set this film on Independence Day, July 4th. Now, so anyway, but mainly I think the discovery for me, the big discovery, is that on this calendar, which was gifted to us by the Lord, we are able now to tell the correct date of Shavuot, which is July 4th. And I don't know if, I mean, I'm guessing the rapture will be on that date, but that could just be, it could be like a day after or 2 days after. I mean, I don't really know for sure, but I guess I'm about 90% it's going to happen on this date here, the 15th of Sivan. I don't know if the Lord is going to use the Exodus 19 narrative of arriving at Mount Sinai on the 15th of Sivan, and then, you know, it's like sanctify yourself today and tomorrow, and then be ready on the third day, for the Lord descends on the mountain on the third day. That would be the 17th of Sivan. I don't know. I mean, it seems like most of the hints are pointing to the 15th, so we'll just have to see. But I really just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that Shavuot is very much still in play. It's not past. It's not past, and I know everybody's looking at the Feast of New Wine now. And, you know, who knows? Maybe it could be a Feast of New Wine rapture. I don't think so, but we'll find out. So thank you for watching the video. I'm going to try to figure out how and where I can upload this, since I've been banned from YouTube. And yeah, God bless. Hey guys, so I just wanted to show you some stuff that I discovered while I've been in YouTube jail, and in the meantime I've been posting on my Twitter account, which is Corporal Joe Bowers. So firstly, let me show you something from the film Back to the Future. So this little scene here is when Marty sets his alarm clock radio to just after midnight so that he can wake up and meet his friend Doc Brown in the mall parking lot. And that's where Doc Brown first shows him his time machine invention. So there's something that I noticed about the numbers on that alarm clock radio. So the first thing you notice is that the time flips from 12:27 a.m. to 12:28 a.m. Okay, and then the radio is also set to 104 FM. So what this is a bit of cleverly encoded astronomical information. So let me show you that real fast. Okay, so we're looking here at the night sky at the end of 2023 on December 27th. And the sun here is marked by the red reticule. It's in the constellation of Sagittarius and also in this Milky Way band here. And it is at 276 degrees of longitude on the ecliptic. So at this point here, from 1227 going into the 28th, was the manifestation of the 276 sign. That is a celestial sign that is encoded within the book of Acts, chapters 27 and 28. Okay, so that's why the Back to the Future alarm clock has the time flipping from 12:27 a.m. to 12:28 a.m. It's a reference to this celestial sign. So it's pointing at this point in time where the sun was right there. The other thing on the clock is the 104 FM on the radio. So if you go from that point in time at the end of December, at the end of last year, and you start going forward, we'll just go forward month by month, you see the sun is moving from right to left along the ecliptic. So you go forward about 7 months, all right? And then you end up, let's say, late June, the sun enters into the constellation of Gemini. Okay, now if you go forward to July 5th, I guess sometime in the morning, the sun arrives at 104 degrees of longitude on the ecliptic. So that is what the 104 FM on that alarm clock radio is referring to. It's referring to when the sun arrives at this position. And this position of the sun in Gemini is also encoded in the story of Paul's ship voyage in Acts 27 and 28, particularly in Acts 28:11, where it mentions Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are the names of the twins in the constellation of Gemini. So that verse is referring to the sun being in Gemini. Okay, so in the Bible, in Acts 27 and 28, you've got two bits of information, right? Astronomical information. You've got the position of the sun over there in Sagittarius, and you've got at the 276 sign at the end of December, and then you've got the position of the sun in early July in Gemini, and that's the exact same information that's given by that alarm clock radio scene in Back to the Future, because that shows you the alarm clock flipping from 12:27 a.m. to 12:28 a.m., which is a reference to those dates where the sun is right there above Sagittarius. Okay, and then it's got the 104 FM, which is a reference to the longitude of the sun on the ecliptic when it's in Gemini on July 5th, and I think also July 6th. Okay, so Satan is a copycat, and if God is encoding astronomical information in Scripture, Satan wants to encode the same astronomical information in scripts, in movie scripts. Now, let me also mention that when the sun is at 104 degrees of ecliptic longitude, it is perfectly aligned with the star Sirius, okay, because the star Sirius is also at 104 degrees on the ecliptic, and that is another reason why they constantly mention Sirius in TV and films. I think it's also a reference to that date, okay? Now, if you remember in that scene in Back to the Future, the alarm clock scene, what actually happens after that scene? Well, then Marty goes and he meets his friend Doc Brown at the parking lot, and he goes 88 miles per hour and disappears. Well, that's very interesting because not only is the number 88 a sort of reference to the Gemini twins, right? Because it's like a pair of 88s, a pair of 8s. But it's also on that date when the sun is at 104 degrees of ecliptic longitude, that date of July 5th, that happens to be exactly 88 days after the second great American eclipse on April 8th. And they encode that eclipse constantly in a lot of films, like Donnie Darko and stuff. And yet another way that this film encodes the sun's position of 104 degrees on the ecliptic is towards the end of the film. Marty has to travel through time again, and he does so with the assistance of a lightning bolt striking the clock tower in the town square at exactly 10:04 p.m. So I think that 10:04 is simply just another way for them to refer to the 104 degrees of the sun's position on the ecliptic. And it's also interesting that they use a lightning bolt because in the Gospels, Jesus said that I beheld Satan falling to earth as a bolt of lightning. So we know that when the tribulation period starts, Satan will be cast out of heaven and come down to earth, and he will be in control. And another thing about this film is that the time machine is constructed out of a DeLorean, and that time machine famously has this license plate that says out of time. Now, of course, what they mean by that is, when Jesus comes, you are out of time. You are either saved from your sins by his blood and get raptured, or you get left behind to experience nuclear World War III, the biblical tribulation, and all that. But I think another reason that they use that particular expression is that if you go to any gematria calculator and punch in out of time, it comes out to 104 in simple ordinal. Now remember, that is a reference to the sun's position of 104 degrees of longitude along the ecliptic, which happens in early July, when you will be out of time. Okay, so one more quick thing that is pertinent to this astronomical interpretation of Paul's ship voyage story in the book of Acts, chapters 27-28. And this is from the film Leave the World Behind. Now, they very intentionally released this film in December of 2023 because in that month, at the end of that month, remember, that is when the 276 sign manifested in the heavens, okay? And remember, that's the sign defined in Acts chapters 27, which places the sun at 276 degrees in the constellation of Sagittarius, right? In the ship, if you will. And there is a very defining scene in that film where an oil tanker runs aground, which is an obvious reference to Paul's ship voyage, because if you look in Acts chapter 27, so remember, in verse 37, they give you the 276 sign information. But if you go down to verse 41, it says that they had to run the ship aground on the island of Malta, okay? So that's what the scene here is all about.
Jesus, Archie, let's go. Let's go.
Now, notice here that you've got this yellow umbrella. So that represents the sun, all right? And what they're showing here very artistically, I guess you could say, is it's a blend of that event in Paul's ship voyage where the ship runs aground and the astronomical scenario in the sky of where the sun ends up right over the Sagittarius ship, like I showed, right? Now, in this case, it's just a matter of perspective. So, the sun moves until it's over Sagittarius, but it's all relative, right? So in this case, it's the Sagittarius ship moving towards the sun right here. Okay, so
Jesus, Archie, let's go. Let's go.
there it is again. So you see, the sun, relatively speaking, is moving towards the ship. So that's how they show that. Again, that's right here. So if we just go back to that time, the sun was right over the ship, okay? That's the ship, that's the anchor. And that's the 276 sign, date, 12/27 going into the 28th. So that's what they're trying to show you there. And it's actually kind of funny because they really shoehorn a lot of stupid dialogue into this movie to reinforce that connection there. So like at this point here, this character is having a conversation with his daughter. There's really no reason to say this, but he says, "Do you remember that time the three of us went to Italy?" And then she says, "What made you think of that?" And he says, "I don't know what else to think about." It's really a stupid, like, pointless dialogue that's just shoehorned in. But of course, the reason that they say that is, of course, because in Paul's ship voyage narrative, the ship is going towards Italy. It's going. I mean, it ends at Italy, right? So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to show that. I mean, there's a lot more stuff you could probably find in this film. Now, keep in mind, this film was produced by Barack Obama's production company, and Barack Obama participated also in that same month, December 2023, in a strange classroom ritual, which was kind of reminiscent of George W. Bush's classroom ritual that he did on 9/11, where he read a children's book to a bunch of students. And Barack Obama did the same thing in a Chicago area school, and he read this book here called Santa's Gotta Go. And you can find this book online. But one of the things I noticed is that in the book, the Santa character yells figgy pudding, and it has this spelling with a bunch of I's. And if you punch that into a gematria calculator, it comes out to 1227, which is pointing to that date of December 27th. Because remember, the 276 sign manifested on that date from, kind of around midnight, so 1227 going into the 28th. And a nice confirmation is in that story. The story is basically like Santa's with them there at their house on Christmas Eve, and his sleigh won't work, and he needs a new part. So he has to go online on this laptop here and order a part, and it doesn't arrive for 3 days. So if you take Christmas Eve, right, 1224 plus 3 days, it takes you to 1227, right, which is the exact time that 276 sign manifested. So this is just another way that they're, showing you this astronomical information. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show is from the film Leave the World Behind, and also the short film iPet Go 2. So if you look at Leave the World Behind, for some reason in the film it shows a lot of deer. The deer keep popping up, and they're kind of like a mysterious element in the film. And then if you look at the classroom scene that has Lily in it, if you look on the wall, it's got a deer on the wall. So that's both interesting, considering that July is the month of the buck moon. So it's a buck full moon. And of course, a buck is a male deer. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is something interesting that I found. So if you recall, we have been tracking the path of Paul's ship in his ship voyage story. And he leaves Malta and goes to Syracuse, he goes to Rhegium, and then he passes through this narrow strait of Messina, and I believe that point corresponds to the rapture. Okay, so and then he ends up at Puteoli, and from there he goes on foot. So at Puteoli he stays there for 7 days. So I believe that corresponds to the 7-year tribulation. And amazingly, in that town of Puteoli, which is now called Pozzuoli in Italy, there was a 4.4 magnitude earthquake exactly 44 days prior to Enochian Shavuot. So if that isn't a sign, I don't know what is. Actually, there is one more thing I wanted to show you guys. This is a very compelling and logical timeline courtesy of David the Watchman, who has his own Watchman channel on YouTube. Definitely go check out that channel. And this timeline points exactly to July 4th, which is our Enochian Shavuot date. So the premise of this timeline is that the April 8th eclipse was the sign of Jonah. And the justification for that viewpoint, I give here in a little bit of text if you want to read that. I won't get into that too deeply. I think a lot of you are already familiar with a lot of that information. The fact that eclipse went over 7 places named Nineveh in the U.S., and also went over the only city in the U.S. named Jonah, and that the eclipse itself was positioned in the sky directly over the Cetus constellation, which is the whale. So yeah, that's the premise of this timeline. So applying that premise would mean that you, starting from that date of April 8th, you have to then apply the warning period of the Jonah story, the 40-day warning period. So you go April 8th plus 40 days, it takes you to May 18th. Okay. Now, since there was no repentance by that date in the USA and the world at large, that triggered the Noah narrative. Okay. Remember, Jesus said his coming would be as in the days of Noah. Okay, so that means that the 7-day warning to get on the ark occurred or was triggered on May 18th at the end of that Jonah 40 days. Okay. So if you do May 18th plus 7 days, it takes you to May 25th. Okay, so then the flood, quote unquote, began on May 25th. Okay, so amazingly, May 25th was also the 17th day of the second month on the rabbinical calendar, which is the date that the flood began, according to Genesis 7:11, which is astounding. That is a very, very, very strong confirmation hint there that this timeline is on track. Okay, now what happens at that point in Genesis 7:11? The flood begins and there's 40 days of rain. So then you take May 25th plus 40 days of rain, and it takes you to Genesis 7:17, where it says, the flood was 40 days upon the earth, the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted above the earth. Okay, after 40 days of rain. So May 25th plus 40 days of rain takes you to July 4th, which is exactly the day we're looking at. So according to this timeline, the ark would presumably be lifted on July 4th, which of course is symbolic of the rapture event. So I just found that to be, like I said, very compelling, very logical, very clear, very hard to deny, and it's kind of like a second witness to our discovery of the correct Shavuot date on July 4th. So thank you to Michael the Watchman for that very brilliant analysis. And also I just want to say thank you to Ecru Symphony channel and Raw Repent channel and Steve Fletcher's channel and God's Land Down Under channel, and forgive me if I'm forgetting anyone. Thank you to all of you for sharing my content, and especially to Ecru Symphony and Raw Repent, who posted my videos, who published my videos in full on their channels. That was very kind of you. I appreciate that. So I just want to show you the obvious astro symbolism pointing to the July timeframe of 2024 that's found in this Jim Carrey film from 1998 called The Truman Show. So this film is about this man named Truman who lives in a fake reality TV show, but he's not aware of it. So his entire world he lives in, like this entire town of Sea Haven, is just a movie set, but a really big movie set.
Good morning!
Morning!
Good morning.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
So he's living in this fake reality, totally
Morning,
oblivious.
Truman! Morning, Spencer! Hey, Pluto. Oh, no, get down! He won't hurt.
So right away, the first hint is he gets accosted by this dog named Pluto, and that is a reference to the planet Pluto's return in 2024 after its 248-year orbital period. So that orbital period began on July 4th, 1776, and then 248 years later, when the orbital period ends, it ends on July 4th, 2024.
Get down! Yeah, I know. It's just me. Come on, Pluto.
So here what happens is one of the stars in the fake sky, which is really just a light, falls from the sky, and he notices it. And he picks it up and he sees that it has a label on it. So the label has it says Sirius on it and then 9 Canis Major. So in the film, it's supposed to be, meaning that light was part of that constellation, the fake constellation. But what they're trying to show you here is this. It's another time indication. So if you look at where the sun is in the first week of July, it's lined up on the ecliptic perfectly with Sirius. And Sirius is also known as the dog star because it's in this dog constellation, Canis Major. So you can see that here. Here's the sun, and it's lined up almost perfectly. So then he just gets in his car and he goes to work.
Wow. Luckily, no one was hurt.
And
But
he's
hey, how
driving
do you
to
feel
the
today?
fake town of Sea Haven,
Good.
which you can
Why
see
don't you
here.
forget about the pearls of
And he goes to this newspaper stand.
Dog fancy, please.
Okay, and there's all these magazine issues of Dog Fancy. And I think that's just a confirmation hint to the Dog Star series.
Thank you very much.
Give me a paper there, will you, Errol? Oh, and one of these. The wife loves her fashion. Yeah.
Hank! Morning, Truman.
Morning, Truman.
Morning, Truman.
So here he gets cornered by these two annoying guys, these twin brothers. And that's a really obvious hint to the constellation of Gemini. So if you go back to that picture of the sky I just showed you, during, I guess, maybe the first 3 weeks of July, the sun is in the constellation of Gemini, which is, of course, the twins constellation there that you can see.
How are you guys? Beautiful day, isn't it?
Always.
And how's your lovely wife?
So it's after these events that he starts to, quote unquote, wake up from his fake reality. And so this is just yet another Gnostic type of film, like the Barbie movie and Matrix and Dark City. There are just a ton of them. But another giveaway is that the director of this reality TV show, his name is Christoph. Here's him pictured right here. So that's a giveaway. It's obviously a reference to Christ, and Christ is being presented here as the controller keeping true man imprisoned. So in other words, Christ is keeping man imprisoned. That's the whole Gnostic theme. And in true Gnostic fashion, the liberator of the man is usually a female character. In this case, it's a redheaded woman. Her name's Sylvia, and it's his kind of love interest, forbidden love interest. And this scene right here shows him meeting her for the first time. And notice that when he meets her for the first time, she's sitting under a tree. So that's a dead giveaway that this represents Lucifer. So Lucifer, of course, is framed as Truman's liberator because all throughout this film, Sylvia works behind the scenes to try to free Truman from Christoph's fake reality TV show. So, of course, the message they're delivering is that Lucifer is liberating true man from Christ. I mean, it's, totally blasphemous. It's just the whole Gnostic lie package. But yeah, I just wanted to mainly show that this Gnostic film, contains astro-symbolism that seems to be pointing to the July 2024 timeframe. So here is some more astro-symbolism from The Truman Show that Brother Andreas and I found. This is a part 2 to the first video that I made, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out. So the first thing I'll show you is at the beginning of the film, before Truman goes out on his front porch and says hello to the neighbors, he's in his bathroom looking at himself in the bathroom mirror, and unbeknownst to him, there's a hidden camera there. But what they show you here is this honeycomb, and this honeycomb is a reference to when the sun first enters the Gemini constellation. It does so at the end of June, and June is known as the month of the honeymoon. Okay, so it's got the honey full moon. I think nowadays they tend to call it a strawberry moon, but originally it was called a honeymoon. So that's what they're showing you here. And they're showing you that just before they go into all these Sun and Gemini hints. And additionally, in this scene, they'll show you, or what the dialogue is. He says, you're going to go to the top of this mountain. So what that's a reference to is the account of Moses going to the top of the mountain at Mount Sinai, when the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai. So that is a reference to the Jewish date of Sivan 15, because that's when that occurred, or 315. Okay, so that actually, if you've seen my other work, That's on July 4th of this year. So if you look at the Enochian Priestly solar calendar, Sivan 15 corresponds to July 4th on our calendar. So the next thing I'll show you is right when he comes out on his front porch, they flash some numbers on the screen. Okay, so I'm not referring to this 10909. Okay, I'm referring to the house numbers. So let me show you that real fast.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Okay, so the numbers they flash here on the screen, first they show you his house number, 36, and then they show you the neighbor's house number down here, 32, and then they go back to his house number, 36. And if you add those up, 36 plus 32 plus 36, you get 104. So this is another reference to the 104 degrees of longitude where the sun is on the ecliptic. Okay, right here in the middle, in when it's in Gemini, and then it's aligned perfectly with Sirius, the Sirius star, the dog star, okay, which is also at 104 degrees on the ecliptic. So, and then right after that scene, they go on, they show the light fixture fall from the fake sky that has Sirius on it, and they show a bunch of dog stuff. So that's what they're telling you right there. So the next thing I want to show is right after that interaction with the neighbors, when Truman is interacting with the light fixture that says Sirius on it that fell from the sky, they frame the shot to have these two pillars here. So this is also showing the constellation Gemini. And then when he's on his way to work, he's walking into his office building. This is really obvious how they show the sun in Gemini. So the logo here is the sun, and then these two pillars are Gemini. Okay, so the next thing I'll show you is when Truman is at work and he's sitting at his desk and he's talking to his colleague. They use some astro symbolism to very cleverly depict the new moon's movement into the constellation of Gemini. So first I'll show you what that looks like in the sky. We got the new moon over here, and of course the new moon is a dark moon. This is set to July 4th, sometime in the evening on Eastern Standard Time. And the new moon will slide over or slide into the Gemini constellation, where the sun is right between the twins. Okay, so nothing too complicated there. The moon has moved into position, and now let me show you the scene.
They're making cutbacks at the end of this month.
Okay, so it was really fast, but what they showed you here is Truman's at his desk, and he's got this pen holder. It's like a dual pen holder. So that represents Gemini. And then in between, you've got this yellow, I think it's a golf ball, that represents the sun. Okay, so they're showing you the sun in Gemini. And then they switch the perspective to behind his colleague, and they'll show the rolling cart move in with the black ball on it. Right there.
They're making cutbacks at
And
the
that
end
black
of this
ball
month.
represents the new moon. Okay? Because the new moon is a dark moon. So there you have the sun in Gemini, and then the new moon moving into the scene there.
Making cutbacks at
Okay, so the next thing I'll show is right after Truman talks to his mother. I think he's in the basement, and he opens up a padlock, and they show you the actual only the last two numbers, but they do that for a reason. So let me just maximize this. 30 and then 15. Okay, 30, 15. So what Brother Andreas thinks this is a reference to is the Hebrew date of 315, because if you take that 30 and that 15 and drop the 0, it becomes 315. And that date is given in the book of Exodus, and it's the date on which Moses ascended the mountain of the Lord at Mount Sinai. So just like Truman was referring to when he was talking to himself in the mirror. you're going to the top of this mountain. And 315 is also the Hebrew date of the Jewish harvest festival known as Shavuot. And I've shown in my other videos that according to the Enochian priestly solar calendar, the date of 315 corresponds to July 4th on our calendar.